I'm Jessica, 28, and last week my husband's family abandoned his dying father's 75th birthday to go on a luxury vacation to Hawaii, then posted videos mocking me for wasting my time on a lost cause. What they didn't know was that Robert, my supposedly paralyzed father-in-law, had been secretly recovering for months and planning the most devastating revenge against the family who wrote him off as worthless. When they returned from Hawaii with their tans and selfies, they walked into a birthday party where the dying man stood up from his wheelchair to deliver news that would destroy their comfortable lives forever. Think you can predict how this family betrayal backfires? Hit that like button if you believe karma has perfect timing, subscribe for more shocking family drama, and let's dive into how sometimes the people everyone counts out are the ones planning the biggest surprises. When I married Tom 3 years ago, I knew I was also marrying into his responsibility as the primary caregiver for his father, Robert. What I didn't expect was how completely his siblings would abandon that responsibility the moment it became inconvenient for their lifestyles. Robert had suffered a severe stroke 18 months earlier that left him partially paralyzed on his right side and struggling with speech difficulties. The doctors had been cautiously optimistic about his recovery potential with proper physical therapy and family support, but his prognosis required intensive daily care and unwavering commitment to his rehabilitation program. Tom, as the youngest of 4 siblings, had always been closest to his father. When Robert needed full-time care, Tom immediately volunteered our guest bedroom and rearranged our entire lives around physical therapy appointments, medication schedules, and the constant attention that stroke recovery demanded. His siblings, Mark, Linda, and Patricia, had initially expressed gratitude for Tom's willingness to take on the caregiving role. "Thank goodness Tom can handle this," Mark had said during a family meeting about Robert's care options. "Linda and I have the kids' school schedules, Patricia has her career demands, and nobody else has the flexibility that you two have." What started as temporary flexibility quickly became permanent expectation. Mark, a successful insurance broker with 2 teenage children, visited maybe once a month for brief, awkward conversations before finding excuses to leave early. Linda, a real estate agent, would drop by occasionally with takeout food and spend most of the visit updating everyone on her latest property deals rather than engaging with her father. Patricia was the worst. As an unmarried marketing executive with a luxury apartment downtown, she had the most flexibility, but contributed the least effort. Her visits were infrequent, brief, and always centered around her own drama, work stress, dating disappointments, vacation planning. She treated Robert's condition like an unfortunate inconvenience rather than a family crisis requiring collective support. Meanwhile, Tom and I restructured our entire existence around Robert's needs. I reduced my work hours to part-time so someone would always be available for his care. Tom installed wheelchair ramps, bathroom safety equipment, and converted our dining room into a physical therapy space. Our social life disappeared, our travel plans were cancelled, and our financial resources were redirected toward medical expenses and home modifications. Most importantly, I spent hours every day working with Robert on his rehabilitation exercises, speech therapy, and emotional support. Stroke recovery is as much about mental resilience as physical healing, and Robert needed someone who believed in his potential for improvement when he was ready to give up on himself. "Jessica, I don't know what we did to deserve you," Robert would say during our afternoon therapy sessions, his speech slowly becoming clearer with consistent practice. "My own children treat me like I'm already dead, but you fight for my recovery like it's your own." The truth was that I genuinely loved Robert. He'd been a devoted husband, successful small business owner, and caring father who'd worked 3 jobs to put all his children through college. His stroke hadn't changed his sharp mind or generous spirit, it had just made him physically dependent at a time when his adult children were too self-absorbed to provide the support he'd given them throughout their lives. But the family dynamic became increasingly toxic as months passed. Tom's siblings began treating our caregiving efforts like a convenient service rather than a sacrifice. They'd make plans that assumed we'd handle Robert's care without discussion, make decisions about his medical treatment without consulting us, and increasingly spoke about him as if his recovery was impossible and his care was simply a burden to be managed. The breaking point came when Patricia announced during a family dinner that she'd been researching long-term care facilities for Robert. "Tom and Jessica can't be expected to handle this indefinitely," she said, not bothering to ask our opinion. "Dad needs professional care, and we need to start thinking practically about the future." Robert's face had gone white during this conversation, understanding that his oldest daughter was already planning to warehouse him in a nursing home despite his ongoing progress in physical therapy. That night, he'd cried for the first time since his stroke, not from physical pain, but from the emotional devastation of realizing his children saw him as a burden rather than a father worth fighting for. "They've already written me off," he whispered to me while Tom was making his evening medication rounds. "They are just waiting for me to die or disappear so they can get back to their normal lives." What Robert didn't know was that his physical recovery had been progressing far better than anyone realized. The speech therapy was working, his motor functions were improving daily, and his cognitive abilities had never been compromised. His doctors were amazed by his progress and increasingly optimistic about his potential for significant independence. But I'd made a decision to keep the extent of his recovery private from Tom's siblings, partly to protect Robert from their premature expectations, but mostly because I was starting to understand that these people needed to face the consequences of their choices before they deserved to benefit from his improvement. The family that had abandoned Robert when he needed them most was about to learn that their father was far from finished with life, and he had some very definite opinions about how his children had treated the people who'd actually cared for him during his recovery. The announcement came during a Sunday family dinner in early March, delivered with the casual indifference that had become typical of Tom's siblings whenever they discussed anything related to Robert's care or our family obligations. "We've decided to take a family vacation to Hawaii over Dad's birthday weekend," Patricia announced, not bothering to look at Robert while she spoke. "The kids need a break from everything that's been going on, and Linda found an amazing resort package that we couldn't pass up." Robert's 75th birthday was March 23rd, a milestone celebration that should have been meaningful for any family. Instead, his children were treating it like an inconvenience that conflicted with their vacation planning. "What about Dad's birthday?" Tom asked, his voice carefully controlled. Mark waved dismissively. "Dad won't even remember what day it is. Besides, Jessica seems to enjoy planning those little celebrations for him. She can handle whatever birthday stuff needs to happen." The casualness with which they assigned me the responsibility for Robert's milestone birthday, while they jetted off to a luxury vacation, was breathtaking in its selfishness. They weren't asking if I minded handling the celebration alone, they were simply informing me that it was now my job. "This is his 75th birthday," I said, unable to keep the incredulity out of my voice. "Don't you think your father would want his children present for something this important?" Linda laughed, a sound devoid of warmth or affection. "Jessica, let's be realistic here. Dad barely recognizes us half the time, he can't participate in conversations, and his condition isn't improving. A birthday party isn't going to change his medical situation." "His condition is improving," I protested. "The physical therapy is working, his speech is getting clearer every week, and his doctors are very optimistic about his continued recovery." Patricia rolled her eyes with theatrical exaggeration. "Jessica, honey, you're a sweet person, but you're not a medical professional. Dad's doctors are just being encouraging to keep us hopeful. The reality is that he's going to need institutional care soon, and we all need to accept that his quality of life isn't going to significantly improve." The conversation revealed everything wrong with this family's approach to Robert's condition. They'd decided he was hopeless and used that assumption to justify abandoning their responsibilities to him. Worse, they were dismissing my observations about his recovery because acknowledging his progress would require them to admit they'd given up on him prematurely. The Hawaii trip is already booked, Mark added with finality. We leave Thursday and return the following Tuesday. Jessica, if you want to do something special for Dad's birthday, we trust your judgment. Maybe order a nice cake or something. Order a nice cake or something. For the man who'd worked multiple jobs to fund their college educations, who'd been there for every important moment in their lives, who deserved better from the children he'd sacrificed everything to support. That evening, Robert and I had a long conversation about his children's priorities and what their absence would mean for his birthday celebration. What I discovered was that Robert had been far more aware of family dynamics than anyone realized, and he'd been making some plans of his own. Jessica, he said, his speech now clear enough that I rarely had to strain to understand him, I need to tell you something important. My recovery has been better than we've let anyone know. Over the next hour, Robert revealed that his physical therapy had been dramatically more successful than we'd shared with his other children. His mobility was nearly restored, his speech was almost back to normal, and his cognitive function had never been impaired. We'd been downplaying his progress partly to protect him from premature expectations, but also because we'd both sensed that his children were looking for excuses to reduce their involvement in his care. I can walk without assistance for short distances, he confessed, demonstrating by standing up from his wheelchair and taking several steady steps around the room. I can speak clearly when I concentrate. Most importantly, I can think just as clearly as I ever could, and I've been thinking a lot about how my children have treated the people who've actually cared for me. The plan we developed over the following weeks was elegant in its simplicity. Robert would continue presenting as more disabled than he actually was, while we planned the most meaningful 75th birthday celebration possible, with or without his children's participation. More importantly, Robert would use his birthday as an opportunity to make some announcements about his estate, his future care arrangements, and his feelings about how his family had handled his medical crisis. The Hawaii vacation proceeded as scheduled, with Mark, Linda, Patricia, and their families posting constant social media updates about their luxury resort, beach activities, and expensive meals. The contrast between their tropical paradise and Robert's quiet birthday celebration would have been painful enough, but they made it deliberately cruel by posting mocking videos about the family members who'd stayed behind. Patricia's Instagram story included a video of herself on the beach, cocktail in hand, saying, "While some people are playing nurse and throwing pity parties for lost causes, we are living our best lives. Sometimes you have to choose happiness over obligation." The video was clearly meant to mock me and Tom for our continued commitment to Robert's care. Linda's Facebook post was even more vicious, family vacation mode. Grateful for siblings who understand that life is for the living, not for dwelling on situations we can't control. Some people need to learn when to let go. The social media mockery was bad enough, but the private messages were worse. Patricia texted me directly, "Hope you're enjoying your little birthday party with the vegetable. Maybe next year you'll understand that your energy would be better spent on people who can actually appreciate it." What they didn't realize was that Robert had been following their social media posts and reading every cruel message they'd sent. The family that had written him off as cognitively impaired had no idea that their father was fully aware of their contempt and making detailed plans to respond appropriately. The birthday celebration we planned for Robert would include some very special guests, some very important announcements, and some very unpleasant surprises for the children who'd chosen Hawaii over their father's milestone birthday. By the time they returned from their tropical vacation, Robert would be ready to show them exactly what they'd been missing, and what they'd lost by missing it. While Robert's children were posting beach selfies and mocking our pity party from their Hawaiian resort, something remarkable was happening in our quiet living room. Robert had been using their absence as an opportunity to reveal the true extent of his recovery, and what I discovered was nothing short of miraculous. Jessica, Robert said one afternoon, standing up from his wheelchair without any assistance, "It's time you knew everything. I've been able to walk independently for over a month now." I watched in amazement as he moved around the room with steady, confident steps, no shuffling, no hesitation, no need for support. His physical therapy had been far more successful than even I had realized, and he'd been deliberately concealing his progress for reasons that were becoming increasingly clear. "Why haven't you told Tom?" I asked. "He'd be so proud of your recovery." Robert's expression grew serious. "Because Tom would immediately share the good news with his siblings, and they don't deserve to know about my recovery until I'm ready to tell them myself. They've spent the last year treating me like I'm already dead, making plans for my care without consulting me, and discussing my future like I'm not intelligent enough to participate in decisions about my own life." Over the following days, Robert demonstrated the full scope of his recovered abilities. His speech was clear and articulate. His mobility was excellent. His cognitive function was sharp enough that he'd been secretly managing his own finances, monitoring his medical care, and making important decisions about his estate that none of his children knew about. "I've been watching how each of my children has responded to my condition," he explained during one of our conversations. "Tom has been devoted, sacrificing his own comfort to ensure I receive proper care. You've treated me with more kindness and respect than my own daughters. But Mark, Linda, and Patricia have shown me exactly who they are when things get difficult." The most shocking revelation was that Robert had been fully aware of every conversation his children had about nursing homes, long-term care facilities, and their plans to institutionalize him when caregiving became too burdensome. He'd heard Patricia researching facilities. He'd witnessed their discussions about selling his house to pay for professional care. Most painfully, he'd been conscious during conversations where they'd expressed relief that his condition meant they wouldn't have to deal with him for much longer. "They talk about me like I'm not in the room," he said, his voice filled with quiet anger. "They discuss my future like I'm a financial burden, to be managed rather than their father who deserves dignity and respect." But Robert's recovery had given him something his children didn't expect: the ability to fight back. While they'd been treating him like a helpless invalid, he'd been consulting with attorneys, financial advisors, and estate planners. The father they'd written off as incompetent had been making very competent decisions about how to respond to their abandonment. "My birthday celebration is going to include some announcements that my children aren't expecting," Robert revealed with a smile that reminded me of the sharp businessman he'd been before his stroke. They chose a Hawaiian vacation over their father's 75th birthday. Now they are going to learn what that choice actually cost them. The guest list for Robert's birthday party was carefully curated and strategically important. In addition to Tom and me, Robert had invited his attorney, his financial advisor, several longtime business associates, and the neighbors who'd been more supportive during his recovery than his own children. Most significantly, he'd arranged for his doctor to attend and provide a professional assessment of his recovery progress. "I want witnesses," Robert explained, "when I make my announcements about the changes I'm implementing in response to how my family has treated my medical situation." The preparations for the birthday celebration became increasingly elaborate as Robert's energy and enthusiasm returned. This wasn't just going to be a milestone birthday party, it was going to be a reckoning. The man his children had abandoned was planning to show them exactly what they'd lost by choosing their vacation over his recovery. But the most devastating surprise was still being prepared. Robert had been in contact with a private investigator who'd been documenting his children's activities during their Hawaii vacation. The social media posts mocking me and Tom, the cruel text messages about wasting time on a lost cause, and their public expressions of relief about avoiding their father's birthday had all been carefully documented. They want to live their best lives while abandoning family obligations, Robert said, reviewing photos of their luxury vacation. They are going to discover that choices have consequences, and their choice to prioritize pleasure over family loyalty is going to cost them more than they ever imagined. The birthday party was scheduled for Saturday afternoon, 2 days after their scheduled return from Hawaii. Robert's children would walk into what they expected to be a small, samba gathering and instead discover a celebration of recovery, an accounting of their behavior, and a father who was far more aware and capable than they'd given him credit for. Most importantly, they were going to learn that the man they'd treated as a burden was actually the person who controlled their financial futures, and he'd been taking detailed notes on how each of them had treated his medical crisis. The wheelchair they'd assumed represented permanent disability was about to become a prop in the most dramatic family confrontation any of us had ever witnessed. The week leading up to Robert's 75th birthday party became a masterclass in strategic planning and emotional preparation. While his children were extending their Hawaii vacation by an extra day to maximize their investment in family time, Robert and I were orchestrating what would become the most significant family gathering in recent memory. "Jessica," Robert said on Thursday morning, practicing walking across the living room with increasing confidence, "I need you to understand that what's going to happen at my birthday party will permanently change this family dynamic. Are you prepared for the fallout?" I had been thinking about exactly that question for days. The Robert who'd been dismissed as a helpless invalid was about to reveal himself as a sharp, aware, and thoroughly disappointed father who'd been watching his children's behavior with perfect clarity. The confrontation would be devastating, but also necessary. "They chose their priorities," I replied. "Now they get to live with the consequences." The guest list had expanded to include some very strategic additions. Robert's longtime attorney, Martin Walsh, would be present to witness any legal announcements. Dr. Patricia Chen, Robert's primary physician, had agreed to attend and provide professional documentation of his recovery progress. 3 of Robert's former business partners, all successful men in their 70s, would be there to offer their perspectives on family loyalty and responsibility. But the most important addition was Robert's sister Margaret, who lived in Phoenix, and had been following the family drama from afar with growing disgust at her nephew's and niece's behavior. Margaret had agreed to fly in for the birthday party specifically to witness Robert's revelations about his recovery and his responses to how his children had handled his medical situation. "Maggie's been furious about how Mark, Linda, and Patricia have treated you," Robert explained. "She's been in contact with me regularly, and she knows exactly how much you and Tom have sacrificed while my other children abandoned their responsibilities. She wants to be here when they face the truth about their choices." The menu for the birthday celebration was designed to accommodate a larger, more formal gathering than the little party his children had dismissed. Robert had hired a catering service, arranged for professional decorations, and planned activities that would keep guests engaged for several hours. This wasn't going to be a brief cake-cutting ceremony, it was going to be a comprehensive celebration of Robert's life, recovery, and future plans. Most significantly, Robert had prepared a speech that would address his children's absence, their attitude toward his condition, and their assumptions about his cognitive abilities. The speech was meticulously written, legally reviewed, and designed to make several important announcements about changes in his estate planning, his care arrangements, and his expectations for future family relationships. "They think I don't understand what they've been saying about me," Robert said, reviewing his notes. "They believe I'm too impaired to comprehend their conversations about nursing homes, their relief about my condition, and their plans to manage me like a financial burden. They are going to discover that I've understood every word, and I have some responses they weren't expecting." Friday evening, the night before the party, we received a group text from Patricia informing us that they'd be popping by for a quick birthday visit before returning to their normal weekend activities. The text was filled with the casual dismissiveness that had characterized their attitude throughout Robert's recovery. "Don't go to any trouble, we'll just stop in for a few minutes to say happy birthday to Dad." The assumption that Robert's 75th birthday deserved only a few minutes of their attention after they'd spent a week in luxury vacation paradise, perfectly encapsulated everything wrong with their priorities. They expected to waltz in, fulfill their minimal family obligations, and leave, unaware that they were walking into the most significant family confrontation of their lives. "Let them come expecting a quick visit," Robert said with grim satisfaction. "They are going to get much more than they bargained for." Saturday morning arrived with perfect spring weather and an energy that felt charged with anticipation. The catering staff arrived early to set up tables, decorations, and a sound system that would ensure every guest could hear Robert's planned announcements. The house was transformed from a quiet recovery space into a venue worthy of celebrating a man's 75 years of life and his remarkable recovery from a devastating medical condition. As guests began arriving around 2 p.m., the atmosphere was celebratory, but also tense with expectation. Everyone present knew that Robert's children had chosen to vacation in Hawaii rather than attend their father's milestone birthday, and everyone was curious about how Robert would address their absence. Dr. Chen arrived with medical records documenting Robert's recovery progress. Attorney Walsh brought legal documents that would formalize some of Robert's recent decisions about his estate and care planning. Margaret flew in from Phoenix with photo albums and stories about Robert's character that would remind everyone of the man his children had been too self-absorbed to appreciate. By 3 p.m., the party was in full swing with nearly 30 guests celebrating Robert's birthday, his recovery, and his resilience. The contrast with his children's expectations of a small, somber gathering couldn't have been more dramatic. At 3:30, we received another text from Patricia, "Running a little late, traffic is crazy after Hawaii flights. Be there soon for Dad's little celebration." The little celebration they were about to walk into included professional catering, live music, heartfelt speeches from longtime friends, and a guest of honor who was prepared to stand up, literally and figuratively, for himself in ways they never anticipated. But the most important moment was still coming. At 4 p.m., Robert would make his speech, reveal the extent of his recovery, and announce the changes he was implementing in response to his children's behavior during his medical crisis. The family members who'd chosen a Hawaiian vacation over their father's 75th birthday were about to discover that their absence had been noted, documented, and addressed in ways that would change their lives forever. At 4:15 p.m., just as Robert was preparing to begin his birthday speech, we heard car doors slamming in the driveway and voices discussing how quickly they could get through the birthday obligation before returning to their weekend plans. Mark, Linda, and Patricia walked through our front door with the casual confidence of people who expected to find a small, quiet gathering they could dominate and dismiss. Instead, they found a house full of guests, professional catering, live music, and decorations that clearly indicated a significant celebration was underway. The shock on their faces was immediate and visible as they realized their father's little birthday party was actually a major event with dozens of attendees. "What's all this?" Patricia asked, her voice carrying the irritated tone of someone whose expectations had been completely overturned. "It's Robert's 75th birthday celebration," I replied simply. He deserved to have his milestone birthday properly honored, whether his children chose to be here or not. Mark's face flushed with embarrassment as he recognized several of their father's longtime business associates and neighbors. Linda looked around nervously, clearly uncomfortable with the formal nature of the gathering and the attention their late arrival was attracting. "Dad," Mark said, approaching Robert's wheelchair, "we are sorry we are a little late. The flights from Hawaii were delayed, and then traffic was terrible." Robert looked up at his son with an expression that was polite, but distinctly cool. "Mark, I'm surprised you made it at all. From your social media posts, it seemed like Hawaii was far more important than anything happening here." The guests had gone quiet, sensing tension that went deeper than simple scheduling conflicts. Robert's tone was sharper than his children had heard in over a year, and his speech was clearer than they remembered being possible. "Dad, we brought you some presents from Hawaii," Linda said nervously, producing a bag of tourist shop souvenirs that looked like afterthoughts rather than meaningful gifts. "How thoughtful," Robert replied. "Perhaps after my birthday speech, we can discuss what your vacation choices have taught me about family priorities." Patricia laughed uncomfortably. "Dad, you don't need to make a big speech. We know you're not feeling well, and all these people must be exhausting for you." "Actually, Patricia, I'm feeling better than I have in months. Much better than you realize. In fact, I have several important announcements to make about my health, my recovery, and my plans for the future." Robert gestured to Tom, who wheeled him to the front of the living room where a microphone had been set up. The 30 guests gathered around expectantly, while his 3 children stood awkwardly near the back, clearly confused by the formal nature of the proceedings. "Friends, family, and honored guests," Robert began, his voice carrying clearly through the sound system, "thank you for joining me in celebrating my 75th birthday. This milestone is particularly meaningful because 18 months ago, many people, including some members of my own family, didn't think I would live to see this day." Mark, Linda, and Patricia exchanged glances, suddenly uncomfortable with the direction of Robert's speech. "I want to begin by thanking the people who made my recovery possible," Robert continued. "My son Tom, who rearranged his entire life to provide the care I needed. My daughter-in-law Jessica, who became my advocate, my therapist, and my champion when others had given up hope. And Dr. Chen, who never stopped believing in my potential for recovery." Dr. Chen stepped forward slightly, acknowledging the recognition while preparing for what she knew was coming next. "But before I make my main announcements," Robert said, his tone becoming more serious, "I need to address something important. 3 of my 4 children chose to spend this milestone birthday week in Hawaii instead of with their father. They posted social media content mocking the family members who stayed to care for me, calling my recovery efforts a lost cause and a pity party." The room was completely silent now. Robert's 3 absent children were visibly squirming as their father publicly addressed their abandonment and cruelty. Patricia sent text messages calling me a vegetable and suggesting that Jessica was wasting her time on someone who couldn't appreciate her efforts. Mark and Linda made social media posts about choosing happiness over obligation, and life for the living instead of supporting family members in medical crisis. Patricia's face went white. She clearly hadn't expected their private communications and social media mockery to be exposed at a public family gathering. "What they didn't realize," Robert continued, his voice growing stronger, "is that their supposedly impaired father has been fully aware of every cruel comment, every dismissive conversation, and every plan they've made to warehouse me in a nursing home to get me out of their way." The tension in the room was palpable. Robert's children were beginning to understand that this birthday party was actually a reckoning for their behavior during his medical recovery. "Which brings me to my first major announcement," Robert said, pausing for dramatic effect. "Dr. Chen, would you please share your recent assessment of my current medical condition?" Dr. Chen stepped forward with a professional smile. "I'm happy to report that Robert has made a remarkable recovery from his stroke. His cognitive function has returned to pre-stroke levels. His speech has improved dramatically. Most significantly, his mobility has recovered to the point where he can walk independently and no longer requires wheelchair assistance for daily activities." The shock on his children's faces was immediate and complete. They'd spent 18 months treating him like a helpless invalid while he'd been steadily recovering his full capabilities. "In fact," Dr. Chen continued, "Robert has been capable of independent living for several months now. His recovery is one of the most successful stroke rehabilitations I've witnessed in my career." Robert smiled at his children's stunned expressions. "Which leads me to my second announcement." He stood up from his wheelchair. The gasps from his children were audible throughout the room as Robert walked steadily to the center of the gathering, moving with confidence and grace that demonstrated complete recovery of his mobility. "Surprise," he said, looking directly at Mark, Linda, and Patricia. The father you wrote off as a lost cause has been walking, talking, and thinking clearly for months while you planned your Hawaiian vacation, and mocked the family members who actually cared about my recovery. Linda started crying. Mark's mouth was hanging open in shock. Patricia looked like she might faint. But Robert wasn't finished with his revelations. The most devastating announcements were still coming. Standing confidently in the center of his own living room, Robert looked at each of his children with the sharp, assessing gaze of a man who had spent months observing their true character during his apparent vulnerability. Now that we've established that your father is fully capable of understanding and participating in important decisions, Robert continued, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to commanding business meetings, let me share the conclusions I've reached about family loyalty, responsibility, and consequences. He gestured toward Tom and me. Tom and Jessica transformed their lives to provide the care I needed. They sacrificed their social life, their financial resources, and their personal comfort to ensure I received proper medical attention and emotional support. They never once complained about the burden, never once suggested I would be better off in professional care, and never once treated me like I was already dead. The contrast he was drawing was becoming painfully clear to everyone present, especially his 3 children, who were beginning to understand the full scope of their failure as family members. Meanwhile, Robert continued, his tone becoming harder, Mark, Linda, and Patricia have treated my medical condition as an inconvenience to be managed rather than a challenge to be overcome together. They discussed nursing home placement while I was in the room, assuming I couldn't understand their conversations. They made plans for my future without consulting me, believing I was too impaired to participate in decisions about my own life. Margaret, Robert's sister, stepped forward from the group of guests. Robert, I've been watching this situation from Phoenix, and I want everyone here to know that your other children have been more concerned about their inheritance than your recovery. They've called me multiple times asking about your estate planning, your property values, and what would happen to your assets if you needed long-term care. The revelation that his children had been calculating their inheritance while he was fighting for recovery hit Robert visibly hard, but he pressed on with his planned announcements. Which brings me to the most important revelation of this celebration, Robert said, pulling out a folder of legal documents. Martin Walsh, my attorney, has helped me make some significant changes to my estate planning based on how my children have responded to my medical crisis. Attorney Walsh stepped forward, his presence lending official gravity to whatever announcements were coming. First, Robert announced, I'm changing the beneficiaries on my life insurance policies. The $500,000 policy that was divided equally among my 4 children will now go entirely to Tom and Jessica, who have proven that family loyalty means more to them than personal convenience. Mark made a strangled sound. Linda's crying intensified. Patricia looked like she was going to be sick. Second, the house that Mark, Linda, and Patricia have been planning to sell to fund my nursing home care will be transferred immediately to Tom and Jessica. They've already made it a home where I can live with dignity and independence, and they've earned the right to continue living here without interference from siblings who abandoned their responsibilities. The financial implications were staggering. Robert's house was worth nearly $400,000, and the life insurance represented another substantial asset that his other children had been counting on inheriting. Third, my investment portfolio and savings accounts, currently worth approximately $800,000, will be restructured to provide Tom and Jessica with immediate access to funds they need for any ongoing care I might require, home improvements, or their own financial security. Patricia finally found her voice, Dad, you can't be serious. We are your children too. We love you. We thought you were too sick to know what was happening. Patricia, I've been fully aware of everything that was happening, Robert replied coldly. I watched you research nursing homes while telling me I was getting better. I heard you complain about the burden of my care to anyone who would listen. I saw your social media posts mocking Jessica for wasting time on a lost cause. But Dad, Mark protested desperately, we have families, mortgages, responsibilities. We couldn't just drop everything like Tom and Jessica could. Mark, you had responsibilities to your father too, Robert answered. Responsibilities you abandoned the moment they became inconvenient. You found time for Hawaii vacations, but not for my 75th birthday. You had money for luxury resorts, but complained about the cost of my medical equipment. Linda tried a different approach. We can make this right. We'll help more with your care now that we know you're getting better. We'll visit more often, contribute more to your expenses. Linda, I don't need your help anymore, Robert said firmly. I needed your help 18 months ago when I was scared, confused, and fighting for my recovery. That's when families are supposed to come together. You chose to step away during the crisis and now want to step back in for the benefits. The fourth and final announcement was the most devastating. Robert pulled out another legal document and handed it to his attorney. Martin, please explain the restraining orders I've filed against Mark, Linda, and Patricia. The room gasped. Attorney Walsh cleared his throat and read from the legal document. Robert Martinez has filed legal restraining orders prohibiting Mark Martinez, Linda Martinez Johnson, and Patricia Martinez from contacting him directly, entering his property, or making any decisions regarding his medical care or financial affairs. These orders are based on documented evidence of emotional abuse, financial exploitation attempts, and abandonment during a medical crisis. Dad, you can't do this to us, Patricia screamed. We are your family. You were my family, Robert corrected. Family members don't abandon each other during medical emergencies. Family members don't mock caregivers who are making sacrifices. Family members don't plan to warehouse their father in nursing homes while calculating their inheritance. The party guests were watching the most dramatic family confrontation any of them had ever witnessed. Robert's 3 children were realizing that their cruelty and neglect during his recovery had cost them their inheritance, their family relationships, and their father's love. Tom and Jessica will be my only emergency contacts, my only authorized medical decision-makers, and my only heirs, Robert concluded. They earned these roles through their actions during my recovery, while you 3 forfeited them through your abandonment. The silence that followed was broken only by Linda's sobbing and the uncomfortable shuffling of party guests, who were witnessing the complete collapse of family relationships in real time. Mark made one final, desperate attempt. Dad, please, let's discuss this privately. You're making decisions while you're emotional. We can work things out as a family. Robert's laugh was bitter. Mark, I've had 18 months to think about these decisions while you assumed I was too impaired to understand what was happening around me. These aren't emotional reactions, they are logical consequences for your choices. With that final statement, Robert walked steadily back to his wheelchair, not because he needed it, but because he wanted to demonstrate the dramatic difference between his actual capabilities and his children's assumptions about his condition. 6 months later, I'm sitting in the sunroom of what is now officially our home, watching Robert tend to the garden he's planted in the backyard, a project that requires the mobility, strength, and cognitive planning his other children insisted he'd never recover. The legal proceedings that followed his birthday party revelations were swift and decisive. Robert's restraining orders were approved by the court after reviewing documented evidence of his children's abandonment, their cruel social media posts, and their attempts to make medical decisions based on assumptions about his cognitive capacity. The estate changes were finalized within 30 days. Tom and I became the sole beneficiaries of Robert's life insurance, the owners of his house, and the managers of his financial assets. Most importantly, we became his chosen family, the people he trusts with his medical decisions, his daily care, and his emotional well-being. Mark, Linda, and Patricia's attempts to contest the estate changes failed spectacularly when their attorney reviewed the evidence Robert had compiled during his recovery. Their social media posts mocking me as a caregiver, their text messages calling him a vegetable, and their documented discussions about nursing home placement while he was present in the room created an unassailable legal record of abandonment and emotional abuse. No judge is going to overturn estate changes made by a competent adult in response to this level of family betrayal, their attorney reportedly told them after reviewing the case. Your father was legally and mentally capable of making these decisions, and he had compelling reasons for making them. The most satisfying aspect of the aftermath was watching them realize that their Hawaii vacation had cost them approximately $1.3 million in inheritance and property, making it the most expensive week-long trip in family history. But the real victory wasn't financial, it was emotional and relational. Robert's recovery, both physical and psychological, accelerated dramatically once he was free from the stress of dealing with children who saw him as a burden rather than a beloved family member. His confidence returned, his sense of humor flourished, and his joy in daily activities became infectious. Jessica, Robert said one morning while we were having coffee on the patio, I need you to know that the best thing that came out of my stroke wasn't my physical recovery, it was discovering who in my family actually loved me unconditionally. Our relationship evolved from caregiver and patient to genuine friends who happen to live together. Robert contributes to household expenses, helps with cooking and maintenance, and provides the kind of wisdom that comes from surviving decades of business challenges and family complications. Tom's relationship with his father deepened beyond anything they'd experienced before. Without the interference of siblings who created drama and demanded attention, father and son discovered shared interests, complementary skills, and mutual respect that had been overshadowed by family chaos for years. Most surprisingly, Robert began dating again. At 75, with his mobility restored and his confidence renewed, he met Margaret O'Brien, a widow in his physical therapy support group, who appreciated his resilience and sense of humor. Their relationship reminded all of us that recovery isn't just about returning to previous capabilities. Sometimes it's about discovering new possibilities you never considered. The former family members who'd abandoned him during his medical crisis occasionally drive by the house, perhaps hoping to catch glimpses of the father they'd written off, or the property they'd lost through their own choices. But the restraining orders remain in effect, and Robert has never wavered in his decision to prioritize relationships based on loyalty over genetics. People think family loyalty is automatic, Robert observed during one of our evening conversations. But loyalty is earned through actions, especially during difficult times. Tom and Jessica earned their place in my life through sacrifice and devotion. Mark, Linda, and Patricia forfeited their places through selfishness and cruelty. The birthday party that exposed their true characters became an annual tradition, but with a different focus. Instead of confronting family betrayal, we celebrate family chosen through love rather than genetics. Robert's friends, neighbors, medical team, and extended family gather each March to honor not just his birthday, but his recovery, his resilience, and his wisdom in recognizing the difference between people who claim to love you and people who actually demonstrate love through their actions. The wheelchair that once symbolized his vulnerability now sits in our garage, occasionally used when Robert's arthritis flares up, but mostly serving as a reminder of how much assumptions can mislead us about people's actual capabilities and potential. The house that his other children wanted to sell to fund nursing home care has become a warm, welcoming home where 3 generations of chosen family create memories, share responsibilities, and demonstrate that the strongest families are built on mutual respect rather than biological connection. The man whose children thought was too impaired to understand their conversations about his future became the architect of his own destiny, making decisions that protected his dignity while rewarding the people who'd protected his well-being when he was most vulnerable. Final thoughts and your stories. Have you ever been underestimated by people who thought they knew your capabilities better than you did? Sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply proving wrong the people who wrote you off, especially when they are family members who should have believed in you from the beginning. What would you have done in Robert's situation? Would you have forgiven family members who abandoned you during a medical crisis? Or would you have made the same decisive changes to protect the people who actually showed up when you needed them most? This experience taught our entire family that recovery isn't just physical. It's about reclaiming your power to make decisions about your own life, especially when others are trying to make those decisions for you. Robert's story reminds us that being vulnerable doesn't mean being powerless, and that the people who support you during your weakest moments deserve to share in your strongest ones. The most valuable lesson from this family drama was learning that loyalty isn't about genetics, it's about choices. The children who chose Hawaii over their father's milestone birthday learned that choices have permanent consequences. The daughter-in-law who chose caregiving over convenience learned that love is always returned by people capable of recognizing it. If this story resonates with you, please hit that like button and share your own experiences with family members who underestimated your strength or abandoned you when you needed support most. Have you ever had to choose between forgiving family betrayal and protecting yourself from people who took your love for granted? Don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories about family betrayals, medical recoveries, and the surprising ways that people's true characters are revealed during crisis situations. Ring that notification bell so you never miss updates about family drama, second chances, and learning to value the people who value you. Please share this video with anyone who needs to hear that it's never too late to stand up for yourself, even when people have convinced you that you're powerless. Sometimes the greatest recovery is emotional, rediscovering your worth and surrounding yourself with people who recognize it. Thank you for listening to Robert's story, and remember, the people who support you during your darkest moments have earned the right to celebrate your brightest ones. True family is defined by actions during difficult times, not by genetics or convenience. Until next time, keep believing in your own recovery, keep choosing people who choose you, and keep standing up for yourself, literally and figuratively, when others try to write you off. The best revenge is living well, and sometimes living well means walking away from people who never deserve to walk beside you.